commonly cited definitions for mindfulness is, it's written here. It's the awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally to the unfolding of experience moment to moment. So I'll kind of break that down in a little bit. But this definition is actually first proposed by this guy. His name is Jon Kabat-Zinn, who really is like the pioneer for bringing the practice of mindfulness into the West. So he was a professor of medicine at the University of Massachusetts who introduced this program called mindfulness-based stress reduction back in the late 1970s, and that was really the time interest in mindfulness meditation really kind of blossomed. So the character to the left is a character for mindfulness in Chinese. So I'm just curious how many of you can recognize what this word is? Okay, someone at the back there. Okay, so yeah, it's a word pronounced as nian in Chinese. So if you really look a bit more closely at the word, you see that it actually consists of two separate characters. The top part of the character refers to present moment, whereas the bottom part of the word refers to heart. So put together, the word for mindfulness in Chinese means placing your heart in the present moment, which I think is kind of a beautiful summary of the meaning of this practice. Because oftentimes, if you kind of pay a bit more attention to where our mind is, you actually notice that a lot of the times you're either living in the past or the future, that our mind somehow is, doesn't kind of go where we want it to go, that we get distracted very easily, or sometimes we get carried away by certain negative thoughts or feelings kind of involuntarily, and that we're easily taken over by stressful thoughts or feelings. So this practice in part is really about training our ability to be more kind of focused on our experiences in the present moment in a non-judgmental way. And it is a great antidote to our more common tendency to like ruminate, on things in the past or, yeah. Okay, that's a great question. So when I talk about non-judgmentally, I mean the ability to perceive our experience in a way that's as unbiased as possible. Because oftentimes, the way we relate to things is that we very quickly rush into judgments. For example, like this person is bad, or this situation is this or that. And so rather than kind of looking at things for what they are, we believe our judgment to be true, and that our actions and behaviors are driven very automatically by the very quick judgments that we make about situations. So yeah, it could be, I don't know, thinking that I'm not able to pass this exam, and then as a result I judge myself as a complete failure. So that would be a great example of a negative judgment that some people often have on themselves. So that would be an example of being very judgmental. So what I'm saying is the practice of mindfulness is really about removing that automatic tendency to judge things, especially negatively, and to be able to just kind of see things the way they are. So that's kind of a quick summary of what it is.
For example, if you fail the exam, you judge yourself as failure. That is judgmental.
Yeah. Yeah.
Non-judgmental means
you remove that judgment. So instead of thinking I'm a failure, you just think, okay, I failed that exam, and you don't necessarily kind of allow that thought to then kind of overtake your mind, and then thinking that you're a failure or whatever. So yeah, it's really kind of training our ability to see things from like a more objective perspective, rather than from a very kind of automatic kind of condition or judgmental perspective. That's part of what it is. Yeah. So hopefully as I say a bit more about this practice, the meaning of it will become even clearer. Yeah. So I was talking a little bit about mind wandering and how oftentimes, in our own daily life, we have this automatic tendency to let our minds kind of wander. So there's actually a group of researchers from Harvard University who decided to do a study on this, just to examine to what extent do people sort of mind wander in their daily life. So they developed this really cool iPhone app And then they recruited over 2,000 people. They are just regular people who are working. And then the app will prompt those people at random times throughout the day, asking them questions such as, what are you feeling now? Is your attention focusing on what you're working on right now? Yeah, how are you feeling? And things like that, just whatever they're doing in a moment. So can anyone guess, like, what percentage of the time did they find that people were not focused on their present moment experience? Does anyone would like to give any random guess? Like, what percentage of time are we mind wandering? More than 50%. Okay. Any other guesses? 20. Whew. Wow, that's really huge. I hope your attention is right here now. Just kidding. Okay, it's here. Okay, so actually the guess by Rekha is quite close. So actually the percentage is 46.9%. So it's actually close to 50% of the time. So can you imagine, like, sort of living like about 50% of the time our mind actually isn't on what we are doing. And so that's quite an incredible finding. And these researchers further found that people who are actually mind wandering actually are less happy. So they found that there's what's called a longitudinal relationship between mind wandering and happiness. So if someone has been sort of ruminating or kind of not really focused on what they're doing, it's more likely that they aren't feeling very happy the next moment. So there's a temporal relationship there. So this is just a finding that I think really highlights the kind of potential role of mindfulness in terms of helping us be happier. So just imagine if you can actually have a tool that allow us to train our attention to be more present, to be more voluntary, we can actually potentially be happier. And there's actually been a lot of research that has been done that support that idea. So, well, I'll just actually move into research at this point. So, consistent with the findings of that study, researchers have actually looked at the degree to which people tend to be mindful in their own daily life, what's called trait mindfulness. Actually positively correlates with a range of variables that are indicative of psychological well-being. So for example, people who self-report to be more mindful also have higher satisfaction with life, higher degrees of sense of vitality, higher self-esteem, empathy, optimism, as well as positive affect, and so on. I'm not going to sort of read out all the variables there, but autonomy, yeah, that means the extent to, sorry, that's a question, right? The extent to which we feel like we're kind of in charge of whatever that we're doing. So people who are more mindful tend to have this greater sense of mastery, like, feeling like, yes, they can take charge of things. Yeah.
There's a prefrontal activation.
Yeah, that's so that's kind of corresponds to the first study that I highlighted, which actually shows that people who are more mindful actually show greater level of prefrontal activation where they're confronted with emotional images. Actually, I'll highlight that study in just a little bit in more detail.
Competence means what?
Sorry? Competence, that means your own kind of capacity in accomplishing things. So people who are more mindful actually tend to have a greater capacity in terms of their ability to like accomplish things. Yeah. So, as you can see, there's actually quite a lot of correlations that have been found. So people who are more mindful have also been found to be less depressed, less anxious, have less difficulties with emotion regulation, as well as lower psychological symptoms in general. And this, I'll talk about it in just a few moments. So yeah, lower levels of activation in brain regions that are responsible for negative emotion. So just going to take a step back to just kind of give you the big picture in terms of research that has been done on the topic of meditation over the past 30 years. So this is a graph that compiled the number of research publications on mindfulness in every year since 1980. So clearly there's like an exponential trend of growth here. In 2013, there's an average of 550 publications on the topic of mindfulness alone. So you can just see how much interest on this topic has really expanded. So much so that, like even Times Magazine has called this whole research on mindfulness like a mindful revolution. So interestingly, even though this has been termed a revolution, this practice of mindfulness actually isn't that new. In fact, this practice is at least 2,500 years old. So if you look at the origin of mindfulness, it actually has its roots in various spiritual traditions. Perhaps it's been most systematically elaborated in the tradition of Buddhism, but you actually also see kind of elements of mindfulness being emphasized in different spiritual traditions. So for example, in a Christian contemplative tradition, in Sufism, in Taoism, as well as in Hinduism. So certainly it's not a practice that's only exclusive to one spiritual tradition. And if you talk about mindfulness, which is all about this ability to live in the present moment, it is a universal human capacity that's not just limited to Buddhists or Christians or Muslims or whatever. It is a capacity that every human being has. But I would like to highlight that it is a practice that has spiritual roots in various traditions. So just, given that research has shown that, there is some potential psychological benefits to mindfulness, researchers have actually started to develop various psychological interventions that are based on the practice of mindfulness. So they were basically wondering, if people who are more mindful are found to be more happy, less stressed, can we actually systematically train people to be more mindful? So this is where we actually see a range of psychological interventions that have been developed that aims to help people cultivate this ability to be sort of more present, as well as this ability to be able to relate to our experience in a less judgmental way. So two of the programs that have been developed are called mindfulness-based stress reduction and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which I'll talk more about in just a moment. And then there are some other psychological treatments that have been developed based on principles of mindfulness for various psychological disorders. For example, borderline personality disorder. But for today's talk, I'll only highlight the first two.